We are now live, Chicka Tika.
Hello. This will wait just a few moments for people to join us. In the meantime, show them the scenery. Show them what we get to look at.
That's Beach Patrol right there.
Doing their job, keeping people safe.
I sure will.
If you live anywhere close to the beach and you're able to, go lay on it today because it's perfect. If you don't, you still go outside if you can because Alright, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning everybody, welcome to yet another live video by the Barrier Island Environmental Education Program. Watched any of our videos before, then you know that I am a naturalist. My name is Alyssa and I'm super excited to get to share with you guys today some of the parts of my favorite class here at Barrier Island, which is our Let's See class. Our Let's See class is our most famous class because it ends at the mud pit, which we will get to do as well and get to see all of that awesome, glorious mud, and I might rub some all over myself. We'll see what happens. If you are watching and you have questions, please be sure to leave those questions in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking as you're watching. We'd like to know who's watching with us and who is learning along with us here. We will have a follow-up video at another time in order to address any of those questions that you guys might have. So please, if you have them, ask them, and we would love to get to them for you. So our Barrier Island Let's See class focuses mainly on the ecology of a barrier island. So how the barrier island forms and the different ecosystems that we have here on the barrier island, as well as how they interact with each other, what kinds of plants or animals are found in each, and how those ecosystems form as well. So first things first, before we do anything else, we want to talk about why it's called a barrier island. The name itself is pretty self-explanatory. The barrier island is going to be an island that runs along the coast, along the mainland, and is separated from the mainland, and it acts as a barrier from storms. In this area of the world, we call them hurricanes, and the barrier island is like the first line of defense for the mainland. So once that hurricane comes onto shore, it starts to slow down as it goes over land. Those big waves and those very strong winds will weaken once they come in contact with land. So the barrier island is that first land that the hurricane is going to touch, and it hopefully will slow down that storm and weaken that storm as it moves further into the mainland, and it acts as a barrier. The barrier islands form from a combination of the movement of water and sand along an existing body of land. And that sounds a little confusing. The best way that I can think to describe it is in a picture. So if you'll join me right down here where we have our very sophisticated drawing tools, my finger in the sand. So what I want you guys to imagine is that here we have an island. This is actually the island that we're standing on right now. It's not quite shaped like a dinosaur egg, but it's very similar. And what we have is we have a river moving this way. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then we have the ocean moving this way. So what's happening as that water is moving along our islands, that water actually picks up sand and deposits it further down. So what ends up happening is our island actually starts to get eroded at one end and build up on the other end. And the same thing kind of happens this way, a little bit eroded and a little bit fatter on this end. So what we start to see is that our dinosaur egg now starts to look a little bit more like a chicken leg, and we actually do call this special shape of island a drumstick island. That is a scientific term that I learned in college, chicken drumstick, the shape of a barrier island. And what happens is that sand moves along our island, both from the river carrying water and the ocean carrying water. This is what we call longshore transport, and it is transporting sand along the shore. As those waters move that sand and they kind of collide a little bit here off the coast of our island, that sand actually begins to drop out of the water, and over time it builds up. And so what we start to see forming here coast of our island is exactly what we talked about, a barrier island, another island off of the coast, closer to the impact of storms that will be coming off of the ocean, slowing down those storms before they reach the rest of the mainland. And if you actually look here on our barrier island, we've got a river this way, and directly behind Miss Abigail with the camera, we've got the Atlantic Ocean. So as she pans that way. And then, if you look where those two bodies of water would meet, straight out in front of our camera there is what we have called DeVoe Bank. And DeVoe Bank is just an example of what I just showed you guys. That is a barrier island in progress. It's not a barrier island yet, because it doesn't have a tree. And once DeVoe Bank has a tree, then we can call it maybe DeVoe Island. I don't know if they'll change the name, but it will actually become an official barrier island. So barrier islands are formed as that sand moves along an existing piece of land and forms that island as those bodies of water collide and drop out that sand. The process that I just described of how one ecosystem forms out of another ecosystem is called succession. And I have a very good example I can show you guys in just a few moments. But for now I want to dive in, no pun intended, to our first ecosystem here on the barrier island, which we've been talking a lot about already, which is our estuary, that body of water right out in front of us. A lot of people are tempted to call this the ocean, but as we just talked about, the ocean is out that way. So if we go due east, we'll actually see the Atlantic Ocean filled with salty water. And there is an opening here where that Atlantic Ocean can come in with the tides and out with the tides. But if we turn and we look at the exact opposite direction, right this way, we're gonna see the North Edisto River. And as we know, rivers have what kind of water? Fresh water. So if we have the Atlantic Ocean coming in and the North Edisto River coming in and meeting together, the water in the middle is going to be a mixture of both fresh and salt water. And the word that we use for a mixture of fresh and salt water is brackish water. So estuaries like this one are characterized by brackish water, a mixture of salt and fresh. Another characteristic of estuaries is their shape. They are semi-enclosed, which basically means it's not completely all the way closed off like a lake, as we've talked about. There's openings at each end that lead to the ocean or the river. But as you can see, it kind of looks like that other island across the way is kind of making a little safe area here. And that is why we call estuaries nursery ecosystems. We touched on this briefly in our seining video that we did a week ago. And if you want to go back and check that out, you're more than welcome to. We have all of the old videos, old live videos on our Facebook page, as well as links to YouTube videos that we've done with a little bit more depth for some of our classes. So please check those out when you get the time. And they'll talk a little bit more about some of these things. But a nursery ecosystem, as the name suggests, has to do with babies. So baby animals feel nice and safe in this estuary because it's semi-enclosed. So it's not like the big open ocean where there's nothing to protect you. It's totally open. They feel a little bit safer and more closed in and protected from some of those bigger animals that might live out in the ocean. Because it's not as salty here, some of those really, really big fish and even some species of sharks will not come this far into the estuary. It's just not salty enough for them. They're not going to be able to live and survive in that water. So young animals can stay here, get a little bit bigger and more grown up, and then they can move on out into the open ocean if that's what their life cycle does. So moving on from our ecosystem here in the estuary, you can see that we are standing on our second ecosystem, which is the beach. And the beach is going to be the part of this island that is between the water and the high tide line. So basically every area that the water might cover during the day. And as you notice, unlike the estuary, which is filled with living things, or our sand dunes, which have lots of plants and animals living in them, this is a completely barren ecosystem. So there's not a lot of life here on the beach ecosystem. And it makes sense because we have semidiurnal tides. That's a big word. Basically what it means is that every 6 hours our tides change from high to low or low to high. And so every 6 hours this ecosystem looks completely different. It might be underwater, it might be completely exposed to the sunshine, but as you can imagine, it's not a very good place for animals to make their home or for plants to grow because it's not very consistent. You might be underwater one moment, you might be completely dry the next moment, and it's unpredictable, so you don't want to build your house somewhere where it might look different every couple hours. If you watch our Let's See video that we posted on YouTube, you'll see that most of the things we found as we walked down the beach are dead, or pieces of dead animals, and that's just because that's what we tend to find here, not a lot of living things. Don't be sad, it's all part of the circle of life, and it helps add nutrients to our beaches here, but it is why we don't see a lot of living things, because of that tidal influence that changes back and forth. As we've already talked about, the movement of the water is very important here on the barrier island. It's important with how the barrier island forms with that longshore transport, but it's also important because the waves and the movement of those waves are how we form our next ecosystem. So right next to the beach ecosystem is our dune ecosystem. And if we allow the beach enough time, we'll begin to see the dune ecosystem form on the beach ecosystem. So as those waves are coming forward, we already said that longshore transport is moving some sand. So sand will be moving forward. But another very important thing that gets washed up on our beaches with that high tide is this stuff right here. It doesn't look very pretty, but it is super important. This is called wrack. And wrack is the foundation for our sand dune ecosystem. So as the wrack and the sand get pushed up, further up the beach, we start to see that there becomes this little hill, this little mound that begins to form, and that is the beginning of our sand dunes. So as that wrack is sitting down there at the bottom, it's breaking down, it's decomposing, and it's releasing so many good nutrients that plants can actually start to be able to grow. And you can see here that there are plants growing all over our sand dunes. The plants are a super important part of the sand dune because if you come closer, you can see that the roots of these plants actually grow down into the sand. And the roots are actually what's keeping the sand here in the sand dunes together. Otherwise, it would just be a giant hill of sand. And if a big strong wind came through, like from a hurricane, that wind would just blow that giant pile of sand away and there'd be no more sand dunes. But plants that begin to grow down act kind of like your hands holding things in place. So as those roots grow, it actually keeps the sand together. And so we're able to have these sand dunes that protect everything behind them from the wind and the waves because of the plants that are growing in through this dune. The process that I just described to you guys is succession, that word we mentioned a little bit earlier, where one ecosystem changes into another ecosystem over time. So again, we started with the beach ecosystem. We gave those natural processes of the waves moving things forward, the decomposition, the plant growth. Give that enough time and you begin to see a completely different ecosystem, the sand dune ecosystem form, which is super cool. We are about to walk up into the dunes, and I want to do just a little disclaimer. When we walk up into the dunes, there is a path that we have already created, that we've already been using. And if you are anywhere near the beach or you go to the beach on vacation, there will be paths for you to use to get from one side of the dunes all the way out to the other to the beach. Use those paths. Do not walk up into the dunes, even if you see something cool, even if you just want to take a picture, even if you just need a break from being around everybody else on the beach, because these are a very, very important ecosystem. And if we are going to step all over those plants, what's going to happen is those plants are going to die. They're not going to be able to hold that sand dune together anymore. That sand dune's got to blow away with the next hurricane, and then everything behind it, like your favorite beach restaurant or beach house, might be susceptible to the winds and the waves of a hurricane. So please, please, please take care of these ecosystems. They are super important, but we do not want to damage them. So that's just my little disclaimer. We're going to head up into the dunes, and you can see that it's not very gradual right now because we are entering a season of king tides later this week, which basically means the high tides are going to be a little higher, the low tides are going to be a little lower, and it does mean that the water begins to come up a little higher in kind of a road. Some of these dunes that are being built, not to worry. Barrier islands are constantly shifting and constantly changing, so we know that things are going to continue to be built forward in the years and months and years to come. But we also are going to see a little bit of loss as well, and that's just the way that it happens. So I'm heading up into the dunes. We're going to go this way. Do you want me to hold that for you?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you, Dad.
If you want to let everybody enjoy the sights. Made it.
Yeah!
And you show them where we just paper. Yes, this is why we didn't want to film ourselves, because it was a little awkward.
It's about 4 feet tall, and I'm 5 foot.
Get it! So we painted up here. This is a really good example, I think, of just a young, small sand dune here. And behind our sand dunes, where we see lots of those pine trees, is our Maritime Forest. We discussed that in more detail in our woods video, which again, you are more than welcome to go back and take a look at. But the Maritime Forest is the next step of succession on a barrier island. So as we give our dunes more time to grow, as the dunes build out further and further and further, the ones towards the back start to get a little bit more nutrient-rich soil. They are protected from some of the intense wind, and they're also kind of given a break from the salt that comes off of the water here. So other plants are able to begin to grow, and then over time you begin to see that maritime forest develop. A maritime forest is a very unique kind of forest. The word itself, maritime, means of the sea. So these are forests that you're only going to find near bodies of salt water. You're not going to find them in Charlotte or Atlanta or Columbia, because those places are further inland. You're going to find maritime forests here near the coast. Where we're standing, or where we're going to begin walking, is not actually part of the maritime forest. We're going to be kind of walking along the edge of the maritime forest into an ecosystem called the back dunes, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is the area behind the dunes. It's kind of the back of the dunes, and it's sort of like a little transition space where we begin to see some plants that might be growing in the maritime forest, but also grow near our salt marsh, and that's our ultimate destination, is the salt marsh. So we'll walk. If we see anything cool, we can stop and talk about it, but we'll just take our path back this way to the salt marsh.
Alyssa, what's that buzzing sound?
Those are cicadas. That's the sound of summer. And if we see one, I would love to find one up close, but they look big and scary. They're usually fat, and they scream like that. Prickly pear up here. Ooh, okay. So right here we have one of my favorite plants here on the barrier island. If you can see it, it is a cactus. I love this pretty yellow flower. I love the time of year where the cactus starts to sprout flowers. But if you thought cacti were only in the desert, now you know better. But I like to think about why we might be finding cactus here. You think about cactus surviving so well in the desert because the desert is hot. The desert is dry, and the desert gets a lot of sunlight, not a lot of fresh water. And that's actually very similar to what's happening to these plants here. It's warm, there's not a lot of fresh water, and there's a lot of exposure to sunlight. So cacti actually do very well in this ecosystem. So next time you're at the beach, you can surprise people and let them know there are cacti at the beach, it's not just in the desert. So I also want to stop and talk about this guy right here for just a second, our palmetto, which is a very important species. Not only is it the state tree of South Carolina, but it's also one that you can find in several different ecosystems. You can find it in the dune ecosystem. You start to see kind of small shrubby ones sprout, but we also see palmetto in our maritime forest. It's what we call a pioneer species, which means it's kind of one of the first species of plant that you find as you begin a new type of ecosystem. So when those sand dunes are still sand dunes, you can see those palmettos, and as they grow bigger and bigger and bigger, they begin to become part of the maritime forest. So they're a pioneer species of that ecosystem. They're also really, really pretty.
Can you point out a smaller palmetto for us, Alyssa?
Yeah, so actually right here on the ground, so palmettos kind of grow, they start off as just one little frond sticking out of the ground. They begin to split off into multiple fronds. They kind of turn into a shrub. They get a little taller, they may be like bushy, and then they get even taller and they are trees. So they actually have several different stages of growth. Fun fact, the little pokey parts sticking off here underneath the palm fronds are called boots. In Florida, there are actually lots of these palmetto trees as well. And believe it or not, Florida at one point had more cowboys than Texas. And those cowboys wanted to make sure when they took off their shoes that they didn't leave them sitting up for snakes or scorpions to crawl into. They wanted to turn their shoes upside down and also give them somewhere they could kind of air out and not be as smelly. So they began to hang their boots upside down on these, and that's why we call them a boot. History!
I love it. And this right here is a boot that's not attached to the tree anymore.
And the boots are actually where the old palm fronds have actually broken off and fallen down. So as the palmetto tree grows upwards, the bottom fronds are not getting as much sunlight. They're a little bit more difficult to help grow. So the palm tree actually does what's called self-pruning, where it actually cuts off nutrients to those lower palm fronds, allows them to actually die and fall off so that the ones on top can get more nutrients. So if you've ever done gardening, pruning is a pretty important part of helping your plants grow. It seems like a bad thing to do, to cut off things on your living plant, but it actually allows your plant to focus more on new growth rather than focusing on giving nutrients, water, and things like that to older parts of the plant. We're still in the back dunes here. And as I said, we're kind of walking along the fringe of the Maritime Forest. So as we kind of go down from the back dune towards the salt marsh, we're going to be walking along the edge. And Abigail, if you want to show them kind of just the edge of the Maritime Forest that kind of backs up against our salt marsh. The cicadas really loud as we get out here. All right. So this is our salt marsh ecosystem. You can see, I like to stop right here, first of all, because it's really pretty, and also because you can get a really good idea of the different parts of a salt marsh from standing here. But first, a little bit about salt marshes. So these are a pretty rare ecosystem in that they don't cover a very large percentage of the Earth's surface. Only about 4% of the Earth's surface is covered by the salt marsh ecosystem. But if you were to break down how much of the living things on Earth depend on salt marshes, you'd find that about a quarter, 25%, of all living things on Earth rely on the salt marsh in some way. Either they're born here, they eat things here, they rely on nutrients that are produced here. So this is a very, very important type of ecosystem. So yet another disclaimer for you guys. We're going to be walking on a path marked through the salt marsh. There's a trail that we've been taking at Barrier Island for a really long time. Please don't just go out into a marsh in your backyard and start tromping around. These are paths that we have had for years and years and years. We know that we're not stepping on any living plants as we're walking through and damaging that ecosystem. And I want to make sure that you guys know that we don't want to be doing that, because we are just now beginning to realize how important these ecosystems are. If you were to go back in time 30, 40 years, people thought that marshes were smelly and they had lots of bugs and they were dirty. And instead of protecting them for the important habitats and ecosystems that they are, a lot of times they would fill them in and they would build things on top of them. And then we realized how important they actually are. So please be super, super careful, just like you are with the dunes, not to just walk through the marsh for fun, because we don't want to damage that ecosystem. And this ecosystem here, I want to point out mainly two parts of it to you. You have the low marsh and you have the high marsh. And the names of those different zones of the marsh are pretty self-explanatory. So the low marsh is lower in elevation, and you can actually physically see with your eyes where the marsh is lower and where those plants stick up a little higher. The low marsh is the part of the marsh that every single day as the tides come in and out, they're going to be subjected to the different tides. So they might be underwater, they might be above the water at different times of the day. The high marsh is going to be less impacted by the tides. So as the tides come in and out, because it's sitting up a little higher, the plants that are in that high marsh area, like these darker areas, and then even further back, you kind of see this little island of trees. It's what we call a hammock island. That is part of the high marsh. It's part of the marsh that actually sticks up above the water. And only when we have extreme tidal events like king tides that happen a couple times a month, are you going to see that those parts of the island start to get a little bit underwater as that tide comes in. But for the most part, it's the low marsh that is going to be having the floods or the droughts, depending on the tidal stage. And so for that reason, all the plants in here, but especially those in the low marsh, have to be really, really tolerant to salt and lack of fresh water. So most of the plants that we see down here belong in a family of plants called the saltworts. And these plants are very, very good at holding on to as much water as possible and making use of water even if it's not fresh. These little guys right here are especially cool. We like to call them marsh pickles, because if you were to, first of all, if you were to break it off, looks a little bit like a pickle, right? And if you were to bite into it, it would not taste vinegary like a pickle, but it is salty like a pickle, and it's totally edible, so that's pretty cool. We're gonna keep walking. Not gonna talk too much because we want to be able to watch our step. This is a great time of year for some of our reptile friends to come out and warm themselves, especially in areas like this. We see a lot of diamondback rattlesnakes, so we're gonna watch our step. You can see that we've got on our mud pit shoes, making sure that we're not wearing sandals as we walk through the mud. Not only will the mud pull our shoes right off of our feet, but we also don't want to step on any critters that might be able to injure us. So we're gonna walk and just enjoy the scenery, and then we'll get to the mud pit in just a few moments. Just picking up some litter. I don't know how well we can see them on the camera, but as we walk on the path in front of us, we'll get a chance to see some more of these guys hopefully soon. We have these fiddler crabs that are kind of scurrying out of the way. Their holes are all over the ground, and fiddler crabs are pretty easy to recognize because they're gonna have one giant claw.
Yes.
So we've got some deer tracks here. So deer do walk through the marsh. They're not just in the Maritime Forest. Our deer here on the barrier island are in pretty much every ecosystem. They'll walk through the marsh, they'll walk through the Maritime Forest, and we find them on the beach sometimes too, and in the dunes. So it's their island also. So, this is as good a time as ever to stop just for a second to show you guys, if this looks familiar, it's because it's that rack that we talked about a little bit earlier that's up on the beach. So the rack that we see washing up is actually going to be marsh grass. So the grass that is alive right now and green and pretty, when it dies, it kind of looks like this old grayish brown broken sticks. And what happens is when the high tide comes into the marsh, it will actually pick up this dead grass, take it back out into the estuary, and then that's how we see it beginning to wash up onto the beach. So the salt marsh is also part of our succession story because the materials for the sand dunes actually start in the salt marsh, and then they kind of make their way out into the estuary, wash up on the beach, and then we begin to see those dunes form. Ooh, can you see the fiddler crabs?
I can see them. I don't know if they can see them on the camera.
We got lots and lots and lots of fiddler crabs.
Let's see how close we can
You
get.
correct me if I'm wrong, and you may not know the answer to this, but I feel like there's a statistic there's 1 million of these per every square mile of salt marsh.
It's per acre,
Per acre, thank you.
which is wild whenever you look at this.
That's
to think
a
about
lot of little
how
fiddler
many little
crabs.
fiddler crabs are out here. Okay, you wanna
So
go
if
ahead?
you've got a 30-acre plot of salt marsh, you've got 30 million fiddler crabs. So this is the path that if you were to be here at Barrier Island with us coming on the Let's See class, we would begin walking this way. We are going to take the walk through the salt marsh, and depending on the tidal stage, it's either higher or lower. Right now the tide is going out, so that's good for us. It means that the tide's going to be a little lower, and hopefully we'll get to see more of the stuff that's on the bottom, and then hopefully there's more nice mud for us to play in.
So Alyssa, what might be interested in eating a fiddler crab?
Oh, lots of stuff. Out here in the marsh, we've got larger crabs like blue crabs who would eat a fiddler crab. You've got raccoons, and hopefully we'll find some scat. Usually when I walk this path, I find just a little bit of scat, which is the scientific word for poop. And we find raccoon scat out here, and a raccoon would definitely make a snack out of a fiddler crab. Maybe a bird. We've got lots of birds that like to snack on these guys as well, like herons and egrets. And I hope we get to see one of them while we're out here because the birds that live out here are beautiful. One thing I think is really cool is that as we're walking, you'll notice kind of in the path, you don't normally see this, but because it's been so long since we've had feet walking through here, we're starting to see some plants actually grow up through the path where we normally walk. And that just goes to show how important it is for you not to walk through a protected ecosystem, because what ends up happening is where feet are, plants don't grow. But as it's only been a couple months without people, and I bet if we were to leave it a few more months, it would completely grow over this path and you wouldn't even know that there used to be a path here. So.
Interestingly enough, as we're walking along, I see a few paths off to the side in different places. Are those man-made, or do those come from somewhere else?
We hope they're not man-made. Sometimes people get out here and they get a little nervous and they step on the side and they make their own path. But no, these paths are what we call game trails, and you'll actually see those in the Maritime Forest as well. Because like I said, deer will be out here. They'll be walking through the marsh. We also do have alligators that might be making their way through, or other animals. And so as those animals take those paths, animals are kind of like people in that they like things that are familiar. So they're going to take the same path over and over again if they can. And then over time, that creates a path as well. But we call that a game trail because it's made by an animal, not by a person. Speaking of animals too. We've got lots of these little guys here. If you can see on the Sparabolus grass. It's very hard not to call it Spartina grass. It's Sparabolus grass now. These are called periwinkle snails, marsh periwinkles. And they are also another important food source here. So fish can eat these guys, crabs, birds, you name it, raccoons. But what's going to happen is these guys climb up or down the stalks of the grass depending on the tidal stage. So they try to stay out of the water. And what ends up happening is as the tide comes in, they crawl all the way up to the top. As the tide goes out, they crawl back down towards the bottom. Ooh, we're starting to get squishy here. Oh yes. And this is that mud that we find here. This is called Plouffe Mud. It's very squishy. It's very stinky. I like the way it smells. I feel like it's either you love it or you hate it. And the reason that this mud smells like this is because it's basically all of the things that are out here in the salt marsh that die and break down. And so it's very good for new life because it basically acts as fertilizer. It has lots of nutrients for other things to live and grow, but it does mean that the smell is not the best. Unless you're like me and then you get used to it and you love it and it's the best smell ever. But I know that I'm in the minority on that. Like that. Oh, see if you can see that right there. To explain how many fiddler crabs, that's just a teeny area right there, but we have got tons of those fiddler crabs.
Why is their one claw so big?
So it's a little bit of a debate. A lot of times people think it's for fighting. It really isn't. They're not that great at fighting with them, or they don't use them for fighting as much. What they're going to use them more for is just trying to impress the ladies. So those are the boy fiddler crabs. And basically, if you can survive with that giant claw and other animals like raccoons or birds don't manage to pick you off, even though you've got this giant claw waving around, girl fiddler crab is going to be like, that's a really smart fiddler crab and I want him to be my boyfriend. So that's how it works.
So it's just like guys with big muscles just showing off their muscles.
So watch your step here. We've got lots of roots. And I'll warn you. It's so squishy! We've got roots here,
Woo!
roots here.
I can feel the suction on my shoes.
Roots here, roots here. Yes, this is why we don't wear sandals or rain boots or Velcro shoes. You've got to tie shoes on and they got to tie tight. So we've got a bird. I want to say that's an oyster catcher. It is. It's an American oyster catcher.
Oh,
Very cool. We got a
beautiful.
bright orange.
Yeah, it looks like a duck a little bit.
This is so good. I know that you guys cannot see it, but I can see in front of me kind of swimming away some small fish. These are mummy chugs, which are a very common type of fish that we find here. And they're just another part of that circle of life. This is part of the reason that this ecosystem is so productive. It's so good for life is because it's got lots of food for other animals to eat. So it kind of helps with that food web that we have here on the barrier island. It doesn't kind of help, it does help, definitely.
Now, Alyssa, I know you were mentioning the importance of wearing shoes out here in the salt marsh. And that's because, you know, we've got twigs out here and things do float in here too. Just like high tide on the beach, things float in here as well. Yep. But what else might we find in here that has kind of a sharp shell?
Oh, we've got lots of mussels in here. And that's another reason that we might find these raccoons hanging out. The raccoons love to come in, dig up those mussels and crack them open and actually eat the inside. There's actually one of those mussel shells back there. And if we see one closer up, we will. But of course, a very famous bivalve, which means a two-shelled animal that we have in the salt marshes as well, is going to be oysters. We are not in the part of the marsh where we're going to see a lot of oysters. You're going to find them more on the banks of our tidal creek if we head over that way. But if you step on an oyster with no shoes on, you will know because they are super, super sharp. They will cut your feet and then not feel very good. We've got some roots right here, so just be careful. We've got a big tangle of roots. I wish you guys could feel this. The mud is so like soft and squishy and cool. It feels awesome. Some more roots right here. easy to see the high marsh, how it sticks up above, and then the low marsh, which is where we're standing. I'm not fighting any super close to the edge here. Oh! I spoke too soon. Here's one of those mussels that we talked about. Someone has obviously already eaten what's on the inside.
I know, and I wanted him for my lunch.
Sorry. One that's not yet. Oh, he's a little open, so actually, oh, we've got some fiddler crabs, it looks like, hiding out inside. And I don't know if they're eating him or not. So this mussel, so it's still alive. You can tell because it kind of closed itself up for me. If they're kind of cracked open, then that is no longer a living mussel. Even if there's something inside, something's probably snacking on it. But basically the inside of the mussel, and I'm saying mussel, M-U-S-S-E-L. The inside of the mussel is a mussel, M-U-S-C-L-E. Its entire body is basically a mussel, and it will actually contract that mussel and close itself up inside of that shell to keep it warm, or to keep it safe. Sorry, we heard a splash. It was a big noise. I don't know what it was. Something cool, maybe. It sounded like it was on the estuary side, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not over here.
And if you ever wondered if spiders live in the marsh, they do. They like to make their webs right across the grass here. That's small fail. A seagull in the marsh is not an uncommon occurrence, but more likely you're going to find them over on the estuary side. But this guy here, he's going to come and make a snack of some fiddler crabs too. Very disappointing. Got some litter.
What is that, a plastic bag?
It is a plastic bag, yep. In one of the most important ecosystems on Earth. So right now this just looks like a bunch of racks standing on the mud, but as we give this time, we'll again begin to see that succession process where this begins to break down. It will become part of this mud and add more to the smell and more to that nice, rich, dark mud that we walk through.
So Alyssa, as we're walking along, do you want to tell us what you're going to do with that trash?
Oh, yes I do, yes I do. So, the South Carolina Aquarium has, it's squishy right here, be careful, has a lot of citizen science apps. And basically what that means is it's an application for your phone where you can actually download it and catalog different things. There is an app for when you see a bottlenose dolphin, recording that and helping scientists keep track of that. There's one for when you notice areas that flood when it rains or when the sea level is rising, and you can take pictures and catalog that. But this is for what we call the Litter-Free Digital Journal. And the Litter-Free Digital Journal is basically an app through the South Carolina Aquarium that you can go online. When you walk outside, if you pick up a piece of trash, for example, plastic bag in the marsh, you can actually go onto the app, take a picture of it, or catalog it, say I found this piece of litter in this location, and upload it. And what that does is it allows us to collect data for scientists to be able to use when they go talk to politicians or to people who run a business and are concerned about the waste that their business might be producing. So this is an important tool that anybody can use in order to make sure that people are aware of the impact that litter has on our ecosystems and our environments. But specifically right now, as I'm holding plastic in my hand, a really big issue that we have is with plastics. Plastic makes its way into every ecosystem on Earth, even the most beautiful ones with all the animals that need to be completely free of trash. And you can help if you want to by going to the Litter-Free Digital Journal. I believe if you want to download the app, it's the South Carolina Aquarium Citizen Science application, and it will take you through that, which is pretty cool. This is a piece of a shoe. That's a pretty common finding. We are very close to the mud pit. It's very squishy, be careful.
Woo! You weren't kidding.
Post. Oh, sorry, buddy. Spider web. There's a post right here.
Okay.
I don't think your leg can make it over to you.
All right, we'll attempt it. We are gonna hurdle a spider web for those of you who are still watching.
You got it. Yes!
It's all those Pilates classes. Wait, what'd you say? I guess so. Woo! Super slick.
There's a fiddler crab this long. Big boy.
Melissa, on the back of your left calf, you have a spider.
Oh, look. Oh, hi. Oh, is it? Hi, buddy. Oh. That's what happens when you walk through spider webs. We gotta get right here. I'll put that for it. Be careful. Right here. Oh, yes. It's a great mud pit day.
Looks dreamy out here.
Marsh pickle went down wrong. We have made it.
Oh my, look at the migration of the fiddler crabs.
Another reason we want you to wear shoes when you're out here. This is it. This is the famous mud pit. I wish there were lots of people here with me so we could be jumping in and throwing mud. Instead, oh man, you guys can't imagine. So cold and sticky and amazing. Put on my face paint. Essential. And there we have it, guys. We made it. For everybody who's stuck with us this whole way, thank you so much. Definitely my favorite class, and I'm just realizing this is probably the last time that I'll ever be at the mud pit. So that's sad because I love this place so much. If you guys have any questions about anything that we talked about, please make sure that you leave those in the comments, and we will have a follow-up video for you guys so that we can answer those. If you have any suggestions about things you'd like to see, let us know about that. Please be sure to check out our YouTube videos. There's lots more content on there for you guys as well that goes into a little bit more depth and just shows you some of the stuff that we get to see every day. But for now, we will see you guys later. Everybody have an awesome day, and goodbye from the mud pit.